We'd like to continue with a short conversation among editors, but I'd like to, because we're at the end of a long day, I'd like to frame this a little bit, given what we've heard, in terms of challenges for international migration scholarship and the International Migration Review. We've been honoring the past and the leadership that has initiated all of the scholarly and the social and the professional events that have brought us to this day with the leadership of the founders of the International Migration Review and the Center for Migration Studies. We have woven in recently of the recognition of Professor Mark Miller and his leadership of the International Migration Review as an editor during some very critical times of international migration scholarship. Right in front of him, I see the next editor of the International Migration Review, Douglas Gurek, who's joining the Center and IMR from Cornell University. We have Archbishop, His Eminence Archbishop Tomasi. We have Father Tomasi with us, who are tremendous resources as we think forward about the future of the International Migration Review. As I look over some of my notes today in terms of challenges, we're challenged to continue our signature in terms of interdisciplinarity. And yet, as I recall us talking at lunch, the challenges to doing that are formidable. Convening people from different corners of different professions, different connections with different methodologies, and different places of the world. So the challenges to maintaining our signature as an interdisciplinary migration journal, I think, are critical. The challenge that Jorgen raised in terms of drawing in and engaging more scholars from let's use shorthand, the Global South, not just scholars of the Global South, but scholars in the Global South, is very much a challenge to the journal. Our challenge to addressing the current and emerging issues in international population movements, issues of climate insecurity and insecurities associated with land use change, and the political and economic dimensions that generate those sorts of displacements. The issues of irregular migration and vulnerability in terms of people working outside or inside or at the nexus of governance and regulatory systems are clearly an issue. And then the wonderful creative issue of combining methodologies that is often talked about but often not well done. And we've got some wonderful examples of multi-methodological approaches conducted by scholars in this room. These are challenges for our success. And I'd like to turn to Archbishop, to Mark, to Doug, for some just initial thoughts about how we might meet those challenges as an organization, as an institution, as a group of very committed migration professionals and scholars. Bella, at the UN, I'd love to draw in that very important institution in terms of convening and promoting dialogue about international population movement. So, Mark, can I turn to you first? You've taken in the dialogue during today. Can you begin to kind of reflect and give us some advice about moving forward?
Should I stand?
You may do whatever you want.
Tell me if you can hear me. I do have somewhat of a booming voice. Can you hear me okay?
Where is the...
They're all there.
Yes.
They can come up.
Oh, please come on up. Come on up. Yes. Yes.
Well, I'm supposed to speak about going forward, but to tell you the truth, I can only think about what has happened in the past. And I'm deeply moved to be here, of course. I need not say I just want to briefly suggest that I think that IMR has in fact played a key role in promoting a very important turn in the social sciences. All across the social sciences where I look, I see migration studies. I see the study of identity, of your field, diasporas. It's incredible. I think we should try to measure just the quantity of social science research that's coming out. It's amazing. Okay, I'm a political scientist, and our curse almost is to study security. I challenge you, try to stay abreast of the books coming out on migration and security. And that was a total non-issue as little as 25 years ago. Nobody, political scientists, didn't study it. There weren't dissertations written on immigration. My friend Gary Freeman claims to have been the first. I'm not sure he's right about that, but we didn't have political scientists who wrote about immigration. So I know that my daily struggle is just trying to keep abreast of the voluminous literature that's being published. Go down to your libraries. Just just look at the physical difficulty of staying abreast of the field. I could say a lot about global governance, and it's important. And I remain, 25 years later, quite pessimistic about prospects for global governance. I think sovereign states are very possessive of their sovereignty. There's abundant evidence of that. And I fear this is going to keep us mired, as it were, at a state similar to what we've been at for the last 25 years. I recall how difficult it was to produce the 25th anniversary issue, how much work went into that. And after I'm looking at all the editors, they must feel the same thing, a sense of exhaustion, but at the same time, one incredible gratitude. You can't have IMR without a dedicated cohort of scholars willing to give of their time and provide excellent evaluation of manuscripts. I think that was our hallmark. I think that's what set us off. We provided scholars with very good feedback from an interdisciplinary network. And when I was in a crutch, I could always go to Doug Gurat, Mary Kreitz, Gary Freeman, Phil Martin, people like this. I wish they were all here so I could thank them. But they did so much of the work. I just facilitated it. Okay? Thank you.
Would others like to talk about the way forward? Bela, I know you have some very interesting ideas for us.
Thank you very much, and wonderful day. Migration optimists and migration pessimists. Well, I can delete the word migration, and I'm an optimist because I worked for over 20 years at the UN, as you know. And maybe has to do with that I think actually the issue of migration, where it is now, and let me first speak a little bit at the migration in the UN, is really at a stage where it has never been before, and I'm sure that is a lot to be contributed, was contributed to a lot of people in this room and all the work that has been done. What we're currently discussing in the development sphere is the most important debate that we've had in 15 years, namely a new set of development goals. The Millennium Development Goals are running out next year, 2015, and all the governments have agreed they want to have a new set of development goals. We call it Sustainable Development Goals. Now, it's a long wish list and it's still not decided. It will be decided in September 2015 if all goes well. But the initial lists that have been made, lo and behold, does include migration and mobility. The Millennium Development Goals did not make any reference to this issue, except in the preambular paragraphs that no one is looking at when it comes to measurement and reporting in terms of progress. So this is, I think, well, not a leap forward, because it is mainstream, if you want. It's on the verge of being mainstream in the global development agenda, and I think that's a great achievement. Now, what are those issues? Very clearly, one of the targets is orderly, safe, and regular migration, improve cooperation, and facilitate labor mobility. I mean, I think that is a recognition of what we need. It speaks to the problems of irregular migration, someone was saying that, but also the need for better governance. And it's quite amazing, I think, that it's still there. The other important aspect is the development impacts, and you've already heard quite a few reasons why migration has positive impacts for development. It can also have development challenges, but those impacts are there, and we're trying to implement concrete measures to enhance those benefits and to reduce those challenges. Just last year, imagine, we had the second, I know, sorry, it's a little bit UN speak, if you will, but we've never, well, for the second time in the history of the General Assembly, we had at the highest level a debate on international migration and development. In 2006, it was the first one. You remember how long it took for the G8 to decide to have that high-level debate. Since Cairo '94, every 2 years, the developing countries wanted to have a conference dedicated to international migration. And a conference means, in our language, negotiations and resolutions. They didn't want to do that. In 2006, and yes, also to the leadership of Kofi Annan and some of those people, it was put on the map, and the only thing was a political result which was almost zero. There was a report written by us, and it's what we call a summary of the chair. Last year we had the second debate, and there was a political declaration on international migration and development. Now, of course, it's all about implementation, but I think this is progress at the global level. At least 192 countries come together on a number of paragraphs on that, and that a number of pages, and that inspired this work also on these new development goals. Human rights, very important. Labor rights of migrant workers are part of that new agenda, at least as it currently stands. What disappeared, unfortunately, is displacement situations and durable solutions for refugees. I think we all need to try to get that back in. So partly, what I want to say is it's part advocacy, but it's also researchers. I think there's really an opportunity to engage, to provide the evidence, to help us with the debates in New York, and not just in the world, it's worldwide. So that's about the development. Very quickly, a few other things that I've heard. Well, governance, yes, global governance. We've heard about the global institutions, but there's also, of course, the regional governance. There is the bilateral governance inside the UN, outside. There is a lot more talk about it, yes, and what it's talk, but then it's better to talk than not to talk, and then later on, hopefully, we'll get it to a better stage, higher, a normative stage, if you want. Diaspora, certainly an issue that is coming up, not just from diaspora institutions in the south, if you want, but also the organization of diasporas, I think, in the north is quite amazing. Around the table, it's really new kid on the block. Security issues, well, the Security Council was chaired on last Wednesday by President Obama, and we are now looking at travel of jihadists to the Middle East. I think, what does that do to our agenda in terms of migration? It's a challenge, I think. Then one issue was mentioned, climate change. It's certainly a challenge to the planet. I think it plays out mostly internally in terms of short distances. And if we talk about international migration, I think that's proportionately, if you want, it's a fairly small proportion, which doesn't matter if your country is disappearing and is sinking in the sea. Yes, you need a solution for the entire population. So governance is certainly one of those issues that I think that continues to be on the rise. The fact that CMS, I understand, moved recently closer to the UN, I think is a great sign. So I'm sure we can continue to benefit from that knowledge, and I look forward to doing that and encourage everyone to keep up the good work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Archbishop Tomasi. Would you like to reflect?
I think it's very difficult to add to a lot of the issues that have been raised. IMR should continue to look at the future. It started like a process directed to the future, and we should continue to be at the cutting edge of the new developments that are emerging. A couple of things that come to my mind is, in the international context, as Bella just talked about, there has been some real progress. For example, there is the committee of the convention, the International Convention on Migrant Workers and their families. And that committee is meeting regularly. There is a special rapporteur from the Human Rights Council. That's an interesting, steady addressing of the issue of human rights applied in the areas of migration. So this is something new, something that has been developing in the last few years. Another interesting aspect, I think, is to look at migration not so much comparing Europe and the United States and Canada alone, as most of the attention has been given to this kind of bilateral confrontation, but to the new reality of the South-South migration. The developing countries are not only sending, but they are receiving immigrants. What's happening, we know relatively little of what's happening in this new phenomenon. But it's a very important development, I think, that needs to be addressed. Another concern is the kind of wrong modesty that we have adopted in dealing with the millions of migrants in the Gulf states. I think that's a delicate political and human issue. There are 4 or 5 more millions of people in the Gulf states where they have no rights to bring a family, they have no rights to unions, they have no rights to decent hours of housing. You go down the line. I think it's such a huge chunk of population and affects Asia in particular. The movement from Sri Lanka, from India, from other countries, something that we have not addressed too much. So if we want to keep the name of the Journal International, that's some chapters that need to be added in the future. Well, the style of developing the journal also we could look at it. I remember that some of the special issues have played a significant role even in the classroom. Sometimes, you know, you focus on one topic. We did on refugees. We did on the role of religion in integration, which is becoming more up to date, especially in Europe, with the issue of Islam, the importance of Islam in the context of immigration and integration, and other religion, not just Islam. Those are issues that could add significantly to the type of service that the IMR delivers. So maybe an occasional special issue, although it can be even an extra issue sometimes. Of course, there's always the question of money involved. Then we have to be very practical. But these are some areas that seems to me, by listening from the international context of Geneva, some of these issues are emerging. I had some other suggestions, but the development of the group around the editorial team around the new editors can contribute, can continue to channel ideas, and the bottom line, it seems to me, is not to look so much at the past, but to look at the future, and to remain at the combination of scholarship, serious scholarship, but also policy significant, relevant, so that the human dimension remains always present.
Well, I'd like to conclude with just a couple of comments. Doug, I think you have an agenda, which is very exciting, very creative, very productive, very constructive, very forward-looking. Thank you, Tricia. But we're also in a moment right now, and I want to, again, thank the authors and your colleagues who've shared your work with the broader community of students of migration, scholars of migration. Your work will make a difference. So I want to thank the authors and all of your support teams. I know you all have people unauthored on your papers that have supported your work as well, and I think that's important to acknowledge. I also want to take this moment of celebrating the guest editors. You cross many boundaries and borders of your own to craft a piece that will have legs, as Pia is interested in, and will affect this field and our thinking and our community. We were brought together today. This is an important moment with all of us spending a full day and hopefully an evening together. We should continue these conversations and celebrate the authors and guest editors. And I want to thank all of my colleagues at the Center for Migration Studies for supporting international migration scholarship. Thank you very much.